député de Saint-Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of our Conservative motion calling on the NDP Liberal government to immediately lift all federal vaccine mandates. Mr. Speaker, when one listens to the members opposite and their friends in the NDP, we hear that it's all about science, that they're following the science. I say to members of the NDP Liberal government, through you, Mr. Speaker, where is the science? Where is the data? Where is the evidence? Where is the evidence, for example, that an unvaccinated trucker who spends most of his or her day working in isolation is a public health risk that somehow merits their being fired from their job? It doesn't take much delving into science. Indeed, it simply takes a matter of applying basic common sense to recognize what an absurdity that is. But that is precisely the policy of the NDP Liberal government. In the face of vaccine mandates that have infringed so significantly upon the rights and freedoms of Canadians, the very least that Canadians could expect is compelling scientific evidence to back them up, to demonstrate a rational connection between the mandates and stopping transmissibility and keeping Canadians safe from COVID. But, Mr. Speaker, after 6 months, this government has failed to tender any science, any data, any evidence whatsoever to demonstrate such a rational connection. And there's a very simple reason for that, Mr. Speaker, and that is because there is no rational connection. These mandates have nothing to do with science and everything to do with politics, politics of the worst kind. And millions of Canadians have suffered as a result. As a result of the NDP Liberal government's punitive vaccine mandates, millions of Canadians are unable to travel freely within Canada, unable to get on a plane or train. These same Canadians who are our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors, can't leave the country for work, for travel, for health reasons, to be reunited with loved ones. They're stuck here at home. Mr. Speaker, this is a serious, unprecedented violation of the mobility rights of Canadians, contrary to Section 6 of the Charter and Article 13 of the Declaration of Human Rights and Article 12 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Mr. Speaker, when one thinks about not being able to travel within one's country, not being able to leave one's country, we think of the former Soviet Union. We think of East Germany. We think of communist China. But this is Canada, and this is the reality that millions of Canadians have been living through for the past 6 months. So extreme are these NDP Liberal vaccine mandates that Canada is the only country in the developed world that restricts air travel on the basis of vaccination status. The only country in the developed democratic world. Wow. Under this NDP Liberal government, Canada is now an international outlier in terms of restricting the freedom of movement of its citizens. And it, again, got to this point not because of science, but because of an arbitrary policy of this Prime Minister, who said some months ago that it was the policy objective of his government to impose the most restrictive COVID measures in the world, no matter how unrelated and unconnected to the science it may be. Mr. Speaker, we're not only talking about a severe infringement on mobility rights. We have seen tens of thousands of Canadians lose their jobs, lose benefits that they had paid into their entire working lives, stripped of the dignity of work, stripped of the dignity of their career, including men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces who have fought bravely and put their lives in harm's way to defend the freedoms that Canadians enjoy, who are now being threatened with dishonorable discharge because of a personal medical decision that they made. And this is happening in Canada, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, what these mandates are really about is control. It's about saying, do as we say. And if you don't, you will be unable to travel, you'll lose your job, you'll lose your benefits, you'll be vilified, and you'll be treated as a second-class citizen. How wrong, how un-Canadian, Mr. Speaker. Everywhere around the world, mandates are being lifted. In all 10 provinces, they have already been lifted or will be lifted. In most of Europe, even yesterday, New Zealand, which had a completely failed approach of getting towards zero COVID, announced that they are lifting their mandates, even New Zealand. And here we have a government that hasn't even provided a plan, hasn't even provided any metrics by which these mandates will be lifted. Instead, the government has allocated $37.4 million over the next 3 years to implement what were intended supposedly to be temporary measures and to making them permanent. Mr. Speaker, Canadians don't want to be controlled. They want to take back control of their lives. They want their freedom back, and they want it now. The only thing standing in their way is this Prime Minister and the NDP Liberal government and their punitive, discriminatory, and unscientific mandates that have caused enormous harm to Canadians. When the Prime Minister talked about imposing the most restrictive mandates in the world, if the Prime Minister's definition of success is being punitive, he has certainly succeeded at that at great harm to everyday, law-abiding, tax-paying Canadians who are upstanding members of their community. Mr. Speaker, end the mandates and end them now.
Question et commentaire, l'honorable.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question for the honourable member is, he spoke about vaccine mandates and travel restrictions in particular. He spoke about travel restrictions, mobility rights, and he compared it, actually, the travel restrictions tantamount to the regime in the Soviet Union. However, I recall just last year when it was his party on that side of the House screaming that border measures be implemented, that travel be restricted for Canadians. So my question, Mr. Speaker, was, did he refer to his former leader, his party, as being equivalent to leaders in the Soviet Union, or is it just political talk today and amnesia for his own party's previous positions?
Honorable député de Saint-Albert.
The Honourable Member for St Albert Edmonton.
With the greatest of respect to the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, it might have been a good question if there was any basis in fact to support it. But the problem, Mr. Speaker, is there is no basis in fact to support it because it has never been the position of the Conservative Party to impose these types of restrictions on Canadians, to limit the ability of Canadians to enter and leave and re-enter Canada. These are unprecedented measures. They're draconian measures, and they are inherently un-Canadian measures.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Colleague from Edmonton, St. Albert, for his comments today. He spoke a lot during his speech about the obligations we have to Canadians and the freedoms that Canadians are entitled to. And I wanted to quote to him from Dr. Catherine Smart, who is, of course, the CMA president. She says, while governments and Canadians are hoping to move past the pandemic, an exhausted and depleted health workforce is struggling to provide timely necessary care to patients and make progress through a significant backlog of tests, surgeries, and regular care. And my question to him is this. What do we owe our healthcare professionals who have stood on the front line and worked so hard? Do we not owe them that? And further to that, I guess the question, in addition to protecting our healthcare workers, is to ask the member whether or not he would be supportive of us including more transfer money to provinces, as the premiers have all asked for, to 35%. Would he be supportive of that? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St Albert Edmonton.
I thank the member for Edmonton Strathcona. And when we talk about healthcare workers, my brother is a healthcare worker. He is a medical doctor. And so I appreciate the important role that healthcare workers played on the front lines throughout COVID. And what I would say to them and what we owe it to them is that we don't fire them after, the next day after they're there on the front lines. I say the member speaks about COVID being here and that Canadians are tired. Yes, we're tired. Yes, it's here, and yes, it's going to be here for a long time. The question that must be answered is these mandates. Is there a scientific basis to support them? Is there a rational connection? Are they actually making a difference? And all 10 medical health officers across Canada have said, no, it's time to move on.
We have time for a quick question. The Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
The former speaker used a line that stuck out to me. She said that what the Liberals have presented to this House and to Canadians as a whole is, quote, opinion masquerading as science. And so to the member who just spoke, I would ask to him this. When we see the difference between political science and medical science, I believe we certainly see where this government has followed the former, the political science. In other words, they've done whatever is politically advantageous to them at the time. So right now we have 10 provinces that have lifted their mandates. We have countries all over the world that have lifted their mandates. And yet this government insists that truckers cannot cross the border and come back into Canada without a vaccine. But they have no science. They have zero science. They have zero science to reinforce these mandates. So my question to this member is this.
They're hauling medical supplies.
My question is this. Does he see any ounce of evidence or scientific proof that these mandates should in fact continue as they have been put in place now?
A very quick answer from the member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my friend for Lethbridge, a great champion of freedom. And in short, there is no evidence that they have tendered. The ball is in their court. Where is the evidence? There is no evidence. What they are more interested in doing is playing COVID theater, which they do in this place every single day.
Resuming debate, the Honourable